It's been 15 years since LeBron James' decision to join the Heat, and it was one of the most incredible moments in sports history. We draft the many ways that the decision has made a lasting impact on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day. For daily content on the Heat, click that subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure you're following us on your podcast app. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Have a fun show for you today. We're talking about the decision, and we have a fun draft segment planned, but the decision, 15 years old this week. There's no question that LeBron's decision changed the Heat franchise forever, changed the NBA forever. There's been a ton written about it this week, so I thought it would be fun to draft the biggest ways the decision impacted and changed the league. But before we get to that, let's just take a listen to that moment from 15 years ago.
The answer to the question everybody wants to know. LeBron, what's your decision?
In this fall, man, it's very tough. In this fall, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat.
Miami Heat. That was the conclusion you woke up with this morning.
That was the conclusion I woke up with this morning.
Do you think that person who, the one person clapping in the background, tells his or her friends, like, that's me? That's the one awkward golf clap in the background.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like, yeah, I couldn't believe it. What a moment! Like,
The one Heat fan there was just like,
yeah. Maybe like a totally awkward, nervous moment. Didn't know what to do. He's like, oh, no one else is clapping. Oh, I guess I gotta stop now. Like, I mean, maybe they're embarrassed about it, but you know, it makes for a great story. What was it? The YMCA in Connecticut somewhere, right? It was just strange that location was the one that was chosen there. But what a phenomenal moment in NBA history, and certainly for the Heat fans. And I know that Heat fans sometimes are still a little bit bitter about LeBron James and everything else. And we talked about this in a recent episode with the growing belief that maybe his stint in Los Angeles is done. And we talked about him being a possible option for Miami to explore. We got some feedback that maybe the Heat and Heat fans wouldn't want him back, but I can't see why you would feel that way. Like, even this is before I had joined the NBA media landscape. I was writing about the team a little bit, and we had just started our former incarnation of this podcast, the Heat Check podcast. And I remember being bummed out when he departed in 2014, but in 2010, like, that was just such an incredible singular moment in sports history.
What do you remember about that? Like, where were you? What were you doing? How did you consume the decision? How did you learn about it? What was your instant reaction?
I had no idea about how to track news, and so I remember getting on Twitter that summer and not knowing who the hell Stephen A. Smith was, and then the growing belief that the three of them would join Miami, and just checking with guys like Michael Wallace. Remember when he used to cover the Heat, and talking about the different possibilities and fretting every day, because this was before social media and sports were tied to sing. Never really felt like Chris Bosh was a realistic option. I know there was some possibility of Amar Stoudemire joining the team, and I thought that was more likely. And you just didn't know what was going on. And then you get the announcement that Wade and Bosh are joining together when they come on, what's it, PTI? I think
PTI.
A couple of days before the decision took place. And Dwayne saying, I have no idea.
You would never do an announcement on PTI now. Was it PTI, or was it just Michael Wilbon performing an interview for SportsCenter? That actually might have been what it was.
Might have been. But you
would still never do it that way, regardless, right? You wouldn't like plan out an interview for a specific drive time slot to announce your decision alongside somebody else. You wouldn't do that anymore.
None of this. It's just, it was such a different time in how players and reporters interacted and announced these sorts of things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It just wouldn't happen that way. And so you got Chris and Dwayne obviously signing with Miami, and then decision is announced, and you're like, oh, what's he going to decide? And I going into that day, I remember hearing all the reports from Smith and others that it seemed like Miami was in the driver's seat, and thinking to myself, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know I'm going to watch it. And for all the people since then are like, oh, it was so selfish, or was self-aggrandizing, etc. All these different takes that people have had on the decision itself. We were all watching, so you can say whatever you want to in retrospect, but at the time, it was a huge deal. And I remember it was like a Tuesday or some random weekday, 8 o'clock on ESPN, and that was appointment viewing. So, it was a really uncomfortable interview, like in terms of like the actual breakdown of it. Jim Gray, I think, was a little. There were moments there where it was a little slow, a little awkward, a little too many commercial breaks to build the tension. What would have really just like 5 minutes of TV
they didn't know how to do it, right? Like they tried to do that classic TV thing where they tried to stretch it out as long as possible, and they're just like, all right, like kind of beating around the bush, and at the very end they do it, and then he announces the decision, and then they talk about it for an awkward amount of time too. LeBron just seemed so uncomfortable, just sort of skittering around in his chair. It was weird. If it had been a better production, I still think it wouldn't be remembered as in a negative context the way that it sometimes is. Now, I just want to point out it did raise $2 million for the Boys and Girls Club, and none of these other tweets and stuff have done that. But I was not on Twitter at the time. I didn't join Twitter until another year or two after that, so I was following it very much in sort of the after Twitter, right? Whether it was reports in the Miami Herald or the Sun Sentinel, or like locally, or finding stuff online coming out of New York. There was a moment there where it looked like everybody was going to go to the Knicks, Dwayne Wade included. And I'm like, do I got to be a Knicks fan now? Like, what is my life? Because this is 2010. I'm in high school, and I was working at a summer camp at the time. It was, at summer. And I was a camp counselor at a summer camp at American Heritage. And I remember the decision, watching it one night, and then going into camp early the next morning, and then just grabbing because we had all the camp spots were in classrooms at the high school, right? And so I just remember grabbing a dry erase marker and just diagramming plays on the whiteboard in one of the classrooms about how they're going to use LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. And I was wrong. Like, I don't think I would love to go back and find my play. I'm sure none of it made sense. I'm sure it had not at all close to what ERIK Spoelstra was envisioning. But I was just like, look at what they're going to be able to do and all this stuff. And I was like nobody cared. They're like, Wes, what are you talking about? Like, but and nobody cared about the plays. Everybody cared that LeBron was coming to Miami, and it was such a huge, monumental moment locally, right? Regardless of it, obviously for the NBA and the history of sports and all this. But unless you were in South Florida at that moment, it felt like a volcano shot off. It was monumental, earth-shaking, and changed everything about this town and its relationship to sports, not just the Miami Heat, but everything. Like, it just changed. It completely upended the entire sports ecosystem here in Miami.
I remember
the reaction was obviously just excitement.
Yeah. That's what I was like. It was a slow process, but then once the minutes went on, so many other experiences since then as a media member, like I was just pacing back and forth. And I remember at one point walking behind my sofa and having to do like push-ups and just having to get the energy out of there.
Right.
And then like when you could tell that Gray was building up to the announcement itself, I remember just clutching the back of my sofa and digging my nails into it and almost like ripping through the fabric at that point in time because I was so excited to hear what happened. And once he said Miami, I remember just kind of leaping into the air and yelling at the top of my lungs over and over and over again and wondering whether the neighbors would call the police or something like that. Because that was as excited as I had ever been as a Heat fan. Just that huge moment, like a star in his peak choosing Miami through this incredible one-of-a-kind television experience. And we've never seen anything like it, and we'll never see anything since. And it was just an incredible experience.
It's why I never begrudge LeBron for the not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7. I never. The excitement here, unless you were here, you just don't get it in terms of just the palpable excitement coursing through the air
Yep.
Like, and the players were in on it too, and we fed off of each other, right? The players were feeding off of the fans' excitement, the fans were feeding off of the players' excitement. And when he was doing that at a season ticket holder event, not knowing that it was going to be broadcast around the world,
right,
then like you understand why it is that LeBron said it, because it was just such an exciting moment at the time. That said, we've mentioned a couple times of how big of a monumental moment that was and how it changed the NBA and the Miami Heat forever. We're going to draft the biggest ways the decision changed the league and the Heat after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day. You suddenly realize, you know what? You kind of want to be in the stands. Well, that's exactly where Game Time comes in, because it's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. And with the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merchandise, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes all of that and more possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop closer to you get to the first pitch, and they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On Major League Baseball, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming Major League game. I know, the Marlins might not necessarily have the attention span of a lot of South Florida fans, but it's still a great viewing experience, in my opinion, even without.
They've been playing well. They got an all-star.
There you go. Well, every team gets an all-star, but yes.
Okay.
The Marlins are a group, and you want to be there to watch these young players kind of perform and try to figure out their way throughout the beginnings of their major league career. So it's always fun to watch it. And you know what? Some great opponents are coming to town. You always want to check those out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you hit like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. The Decision Draft. Let's do it. We like to do these drafts on Fridays. David, we're going to draft the ways in which the decision changed the Miami Heat in the NBA. We're just going to draft our favorite topics, maybe the thing that we think was the biggest takeaway from the decision. We'll start with a coin flip as we always do. Call it.
Tails never fails.
I don't think you've ever not done tails. It's heads this time, finally. Jesus.
Tails finally
my
failed.
first time.
They lied to me.
All right. I'm going to take the first pick here. You were talking about this a little bit, about how you were on the edge of your seat during the 8 p.m. primetime event watching the decision. And then when LeBron said, "I'm taking my talents to South Beach to play for the Miami Heat," how you leapt off your couch and needed to just release the testosterone by doing push-ups and random other calisthenics. Yep. But to me, the decision was when we moved into an NBA world, for better or for worse, doesn't matter, not judging it. But we moved into an NBA world where player movement was now a bigger deal than championships, because you were talking about your reaction to LeBron deciding to play for the Miami Heat is the same reaction that you have at the final buzzer of winning a championship. It's the same exact reaction. It's pots and pans. It's the same reaction. And when LeBron made that decision, it felt like we had won a championship. It felt like we had won something. You win the lottery, you win a champion, something. It felt like you had won something. And I think ever since then, fan bases have been chasing that high, whether it's, we're the team that just got Kevin Durant. We're the team that just got James Harden. We're the team that just got that. Heat fans have been chasing that high forever. We just got Jimmy Butler. You're always chasing that high of what superstar are we going to get next, because it feels like a monumental win. It's something that you talk about for days and weeks and months, just like you still talk about for a championship. And I would argue even now, and the reason why I say player movement has now surpassed championships in terms of the things that fans want to win at this point, is because you barely talk about who wins the championship anymore. You talk about the acquisition parts of it much longer, even after the fact. And so, I think LeBron's decision 15 years ago moved us into this NBA world where it's often criticized for this, but I think we're living in it. Player movement over championships.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it is a thing.
No doubt. I think you have fans of the NBA who are mostly transactional. Like they love the idea of transactions, whether it's leading up to the trade deadline, free agency, the draft, things of that sort, rather than the actual quality or games being played, much less even in the playoffs. Sometimes the playoffs almost feel like an afterthought to some teams. It's like, again, I understand that given that you have 16 teams there, and I think that's, if anything, that might be why the existence of the play-in tournament is there, is that because it invites a couple of more teams and fan bases to be a part of the whole postseason experience, even if it's short-lived, because we've kind of just alienated half the fan base right away, and they have nothing to look forward to. It's like, oh, what do I even care about the playoffs? No players are getting moved. It's not that big a deal. That wasn't the case. That wasn't the way it was. Like, even when your team was out of the playoffs years ago, you would still follow along the playoffs because it's NBA basketball and you love and breathe NBA basketball. And I don't know that that's always been the case, or is always the case now. So I think the decision really did have a big impact in how we've seen major transactions since then, from 2010 then to 2014, when LeBron left again, and then when Kevin Durant joins
in 2016.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot that's happened since then.
Yep. Your pick next.
I think the way I see it, and maybe it's just my nature as an older fan here, the connection between players and teams, and the perception of that players, and the connection of the player associated with the team has changed forever. Because I don't think anybody ever expected a homegrown, quote unquote, homegrown player like LeBron James to leave the Cleveland Cavaliers, and who you feel is somebody that is connected not just to the team, but to the city and the fans, because he's one of us, for better, for worse. Again, that's just this understanding that he's a player that we grew a few miles away from Cleveland and Akron, Ohio. But I really don't have that much loyalty. I don't want to play with Boobie Gibson anymore. So I'm leaving this team. I'm ready to move on. Mercenarial and just go from team to team. And we see it now with LeBron. Like, he could join another team. Kevin Durant, we've talked about this a number of times. I know I've talked about it on Lockdown NBA before. Like, what team is he associated with? Is it the Thunder, where he started off but didn't have any kind of postseason success? Is it Golden State, where he won 2 titles? He's played for Brooklyn. He's played for Phoenix. Now he moves on to Houston. Like, the connection between a player and a team, I think, has changed forever.
Yeah. It's a little bit more like an AAU style thing, where you just kind of bounce around different teams, and you just do, like, these high schoolers will just move to different AAU programs and different prep schools just based on what's better for them in their career, right? And they grow up doing that. No wonder they're still doing it at the NBA. And then even in college now with the transfer portal and stuff, it's like, why would they stop all of a sudden when they got to the NBA? It almost makes less sense to just stick with one team. But most fans don't pay attention to these players when they're in AAU circuits or prep schools or even in college. You know, like, a lot of these players arrive on the doorstep of the casual NBA fan, or even just NBA fans. I shouldn't even call them casual. If you're an NBA fan, doesn't mean that you're a college basketball fan or a high school basketball fan, but their entire lives are just bouncing around from team to team for whatever's best for them. It would be strange if all of a sudden they were just like, now I'm in the NBA, I'm just going to stick with and I do think that's a generational thing too. Like, I know people my age, just like, they just don't stay with one company, regardless of what they do for work. They don't just stay with a company for 20 years anymore, where it's like my parents and grandparents and things like that. They just, like, they got a job and then they just stuck with that company until they retired. And then they would get like a shiny watch and a nice pen at the very end, and then they'd be sent off into retirement. And it's like, I don't know anybody that sticks with one company for 10 years anymore. So
Except us. Locked on.
Except us. Locked on. Yeah, what was it? We got 9 years recently.
Locked on lifers.
Locked on lifers, baby. The other thing that you mentioned there, and it's not one of my draft picks, but it's the whole idea of going home. This was really more when LeBron left in 2014 to go back to Cleveland. But then we kind of took the extreme LeBron example and tried to apply it to other, like, we were like, will Durant go back and play for the Wizards? And it's like, what? Why? Because he's from the Washington, D.C. area? What does he care? Like, we all of a sudden just started assuming that superstars wanted to go and play for their team that they grew up, where that was never a thing before, ever. It was just like, you got drafted to a team and that was your new home. but and nobody's ever really done that, by the way, ever since, like at a really high level. I mean, you see like De'Aaron Fox go to San Antonio, but that was more of like he would have stayed in Sacramento if that wasn't such a shit show.
I think that was more a spousal decision too, from everything we've heard.
Yeah.
And yet, I've talked to players about the idea of coming back home, and they'll say the exact opposite. It's a bigger pain in the ass to have to play back home, because you get family and friends going, "Oh, yo, hook me up with tickets," and then it's like the constant demands. It's like, you know what? I'd rather just be playing in another city. I don't have to worry about. I can get tickets for my wives, my girlfriend, or both at the same time, and I don't have to worry about anything else. Now it's just instead like this, everybody crawling out of the woodwork asking you for more, and it's exhausting. And I know that maybe fans might not consider that, but it is.
We're going to continue the draft after this. All right, I have the next pick. LeBron's decision ushered in the failure that was the Big Three era.
Ooh.
Not for the Miami Heat. It was an absolute success. 4 years, 4 NBA Finals runs, 2 championships. Unreal success for the Miami Heat. It was a failure for every other team that tried to do it. And we're just now kind of coming out of the Big Three era. And that's in part because I think 2 things. Number one, the CBA makes it very difficult to have 3 max players at this point. And the other reason, too, is I just think teams realized, oh, we're just not good at this. The NBA realized we're not good at big threes. We're better at big twos and depth. Right. And just like a quick recap of some of the other big threes that sprouted up. So to be clear, the Boston Celtics with Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen, that was really the original big three that formed a couple of years prior to LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. Because even LeBron and D Wade and Bosh talked about how they got together in order to beat the Celtics. So I want to give, but I think what you're about to say, Dave, it wasn't like the landmark thing that the Heat Big Three was. It wasn't like the marketed thing that the Heat Big Three was, but it was sort of the first version of it.
No, because I could go back to the Big Three in Chicago with
you're right. The modern, I should say the modern Big Three, the modern version of it. Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
But you're right in terms of the historical context. It wasn't the very first Big Three ever, but in terms of spurring the Big Three era, that I think, and maybe you disagree with this, but like 2010 to even ish kind of right now, again, we're just sort of coming out of it. That was like a different way in that everybody was sort of looking for their big three. Like every team had a poster of 3 guys.
Yep.
Right? Like that's different. We never had that in the NBA prior to that, right?
No, I agree with that.
Okay. So you look at teams like the Knicks, who tried to do it with Carmelo Anthony, Amari Stoudemire, and Tyson Chandler right after the Heat formed their big three. The Lakers, remember they brought in Steve Nash and Dwight Howard to play alongside Kobe Bryant. That was a failure. You saw the Clippers with Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and Chris Paul really start billing themselves as a big three, and then they tried it again many years later with Kawhi, Paul George, and James Harden. You saw Brooklyn try to do it with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden. You saw Phoenix try to do it with Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant. I'm sure I'm missing plenty of other examples. Oh, Brooklyn did it, right? They traded for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, and then had Deron Williams there. And that was obvious. And Joe Johnson, an immense failure there as well. Brook Lopez was a part of that team. He was. I'm sure I'm missing other examples here, but the point being is that a lot of these teams tried to create their own big threes, and zero of them worked. The one that you can argue maybe worked the most was the Clippers, and they didn't win. They never even made an NBA Finals, right? It was just like versus the rest of their franchise history. It was still the best era of the Clippers that they've ever had.
Right.
And they still got to 1 Western Conference Finals throughout 2 big three eras for them, whether it was Paul Griffin, Jordan, or the Kawhi version of it. So Philadelphia tried a big three too, but it doesn't work. And I think the part that they're missing, and maybe, and let me know what you think about this, but I think everybody was trying to import big threes and all the winning ways that come with those things. Like the Brooklyn example is probably the best one, where Kevin Durant won a championship in Golden State. Kyrie had won a championship in Cleveland. James Harden had a lot of individual success with Houston. And then they all just tried to import all of their various different backgrounds and resumes into Brooklyn, where there was no standing culture or organizational principles with a brand new head coach and everything. They just tried to kind of manufacture it out of thin air. And that's really freaking hard to do. And that team won a bunch of games. They got a couple of decent playoff runs, but to do the actual big thing of making a finals and winning a championship, that stuff's hard. And I think that's the part that the Heat got right that these other big threes didn't, was that, number one, they had an incumbent superstar in Dwayne Wade, who was able to show LeBron and Chris Bosh, this is how we do things here. And a team that had won a championship 4 years prior to the formation of the big three, with a guy, Pat Riley, who was the coach in 2006, was still in charge of the organization at that point. ERIK SPOELSTRA, lead assistant on the 2006 team, was now the head coach. Like, there were things for LeBron to bring to the team, obviously, things for Bosh to bring to the team, but also things for the team to give back to LeBron and Bosh when they joined. And it was the giving back part that I think a lot of these other big threes got wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just it feels forced a bigger microscope on roster construction and building and things of that sort, and how a trio like that could be assembled. And look, you could even say the formation of Miami's big three led to the process. You know, it was a clear understanding from Sam Hinkie, was that we have to just change the way we build a team, because we can't compete against the better team, the best assembled team.
We need stars and multiple of them.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's a huge component there. So that's a good call. I've got my next one.
Yep.
The connection between the NBA and social media. And I already kind of hinted at in my own, just, signing up for Twitter in 2010. But then you have 2014 and LeBron's announcement being tweeted by Lee Jenkins, who's now a member of the Clippers front office, or at least he was recently. I don't know if he still is or not, but yeah. So, just completely changing the way sports and fandoms followed. And that whole summer, 2014, people following font changes on LeBron's website, Baker, his cars being taken out of his property here in South Florida, like just tracking everything on social media. And now, players still tend to be a little away from social media. They don't really tend to use it as a tool themselves. But I think for fans, it's such an important way of connecting to the latest. And I don't think, Shams and Woj aren't born if 2014 didn't happen.
Woj just talked about that. Woj just literally said if it was
really?
just perfect. Yeah, it was perfect timing about like in 2010 and 2014 when he was working for Yahoo, about how he just sort of capitalized. He just started riding this wave of Twitter. The scoops thing, the Woj and the Shams, that doesn't exist without LeBron's decision. And NBA Twitter doesn't exist. You're not the only person who signed up for Twitter because of the decision in 2010.
I know.
Like, NBA Twitter was basically invented in 2010. Those were the very beginning steps. And so it's a great call out and a necessary one, because Twitter is so associated now with the NBA in a way that it's not associated with any other sport, right? Absolutely. It's just not. Every sport has their version of it, but NBA Twitter is a machine. A couple more picks here before we get out. A Heat specific one. I have a couple here. I'm going to go Spo's legacy.
Oh, yeah. That's a great one.
The decision redefined ERIK SPOELSTRA.
Yeah.
And first of all, what it did, so Spo was the coach for 2 years prior to LeBron arriving in 2010. And I feel like most non-Heat fans don't even realize that. But he had been the coach for 2 bad Heat teams. Kind of got his toes wet. Made the playoffs. Yeah, the year. But he is sort of thrust into the limelight when LeBron arrives. There's these reports that LeBron perhaps thought that Pat Riley was going to pull a Stan Van Gundy and kind of step back down from the front office to coach the team. He wasn't going to do that. He had the utmost confidence in Spoelstra. There was obvious public chafing between LeBron and Spo in those early days. Bumpgate when they started the year 9-8. All these things. It was huge. It's the most publicized 9-8 start of all time. And Spo was at the very middle of that. And you had the talk shows and everything saying Spo isn't the right guy. He's too young. He's too green. He can't lead this team. It needs to be Pat. All these things. And not only does he survive it, he thrives. And he becomes the greatest coach that LeBron has ever played for. and I don't think that that's even debatable. Nobody's had more success coaching LeBron than Erik Spoelstra has. He goes into they lose in the 2011 finals, goes into the offseason, takes a plane to Eugene, Oregon, hangs out with Chip Kelly at Oregon football training camp for a while, learns about the spread offense in Oregon, brings back something that we had never talked about before in NBA history, pace and space. That was invented by Erik Spoelstra, the entire concept of pace and space. It was written about by Tom Haberstroh for an ESPN feature on that trip that Erik Spoelstra took to Oregon. And that was really the first time we had heard that term. And we're still living in the pace and space era now. And it started with those Miami Heat. And it's evolved since then. And it's evolved way past where Miami was doing it then. But even playing Bosh at the 5 and all these things, that was the thing that there is no Draymond Green at the 5 death lineup if not for Bosh at the 5. And Steve Kerr has talked about this. But 3-point shooting, all of these things, creating space for your superstars. That was never a thing before, right? The closest we got to it was the triangle. I'm not even being facetious. Like literally, that was sort of the idea of the triangle, but it was just so like this new version of it was so far ahead of its time in terms of player positioning at every second of the shot clock. But Spo's legacy at that point, I think, is solidified because he comes back with that highly publicized trip to Oregon. They win the championship in 2012. He moves Bosh to center during the playoffs. They win again in 2013. He goes toe-to-toe with Greg Popovich, who at that point was considered the best coach in the NBA. Goes back there 2014 and all these things. And he is the only coach to ever survive LeBron leaving his organization. And I don't know that Spoelstra is still the coach of the Miami Heat, frankly, if LeBron doesn't come in 2010. Because who knows? Like if it's not LeBron and instead they sign like Amari Stoudemire or something, they don't have that level of success. And Spoelstra's probably the coach for several years, but he's probably churned just like every other organization churns their coaches at this point.
It's a great point. And there's a lot of talk always about the coaching tree, and Greg Popovich, I think, is best known for that because he had so many disciples of his who have gone on to head coaching positions. But I think Spo has been just as influential in terms of now teams kind of look internally and look for somebody along the same lines, a guy who's just driven, who has a clear mind for the capacity to be a head coach, who is younger, perhaps. Up to that point, coaches felt like a lot of the hiring practices were a lot of retreads, and there's still some of that today, but you get a lot of guys in their 50s, 60s, maybe even older. It's like, oh, let's bring back him. He's got experience.
The most inventive you would get is you would go to college and get a 60-year-old white guy from college to coach your team.
Yes. Now you're looking, might have the kind of drive, the energy to connect with younger players and be able to maximize what they can do. And I don't think any of that happens if not appreciate that sort of thing. So I've got one more too. Miami as a destination city. I think the decision changed that forever, because to go on TV and say, I'm not choosing New York, who is like, oh, we're always going to get star players, to not choose your quote unquote hometown, or Chicago and fill in for for Michael Jordan's legacy, or any of the other options at the time, and to specifically pick Miami, I think put Miami on a map in a way that was different than 2004 when Shaquille O'Neal was traded for it. At that point in time, Miami became the center of the NBA world, and with good reason, because Shaq was the biggest star in the game at that point in time. But the idea of Miami as a destination city, and to think, I know a lot of fans kind of chide the organization for this, but they've been in the running for every superstar acquisition since. And I think all of that comes from 2010 and LeBron's decision.
I have it written here: Heat as Lakers East. I mean, that's what it is. There is no other. It's the Lakers and it's the Heat. The Shaq thing is such an important moment in Heat history, and you and I have talked about this 100 times, where LeBron doesn't come to Miami if Shaq doesn't come to Miami in 2004. But the difference between Shaq and LeBron was Shaq got traded to Miami, and he still had to sign off on the trade in the usual way that superstars have a little bit of leverage in those situations. But LeBron chose Miami as an unrestricted free agent. He chose it. Get me there. Y'all figure it out. But I want to play for this organization in this city. And that is very Lakers-like, where you literally just have players who just say, I would love to play for Miami. I love the warm weather. I love the history of the organization, the banners and the rafters, the winning. Like, the Lakers have this aura around them. And I'm not saying that the Heat have the same aura as the Lakers because nothing is quite Lakers. But it's as close, I think, in the NBA as you get. Right? Like the Celtics have the championships in their history and everything like that, but they don't draw stars the way that Miami does. New York doesn't draw stars the way that Miami does, right? They don't have the warm weather, and they don't have the success that the Heat have. And to me, I think it's a great shout out. I had it written down as well. I think that has to be considered. And LeBron, maybe the biggest star in NBA history outside of Michael Jordan, choosing the Heat, putting his stamp of approval on that Heat organization.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Every superstar since then has been like, well, if it was good enough for LeBron, it's good enough for me.
Absolutely.
All right. That'll do it for our decision draft. That's also going to do it for the week for us. I'll be in Vegas over the weekend for Summer League. I'll be back and we'll be back early next week with some reactions from the first weekend of Summer League and any other news that happens. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.